Have you ever wondered what happens to the things people call worthless, the ones nobody wants, the ones everyone laughs about, when the world finally changes its mind about them? I am 74 years old now. I tell this story slowly because that is how I have learned to tell most things these days, slowly, with the truth given room to breathe. There is no anger left in me, only the memory and what it taught me. My name does not matter so much as what happened to me, but if it helps you picture an old woman at a kitchen table, you can call me a leaner. I lived most of my life in a small town where everybody knew everybody, where the hardware store on Main Street had been in my husband's family for 3 generations. My husband, Walter, ran that store with his brother for 30 years. I kept the books. I knew every nail, every hinge, every customer's name and how much credit they were good for. Walter passed 11 years ago, a heart attack, quiet in his sleep, the kind of death that leaves you grateful and hollow at the same time. After he was gone, our son David took over running the store alongside his wife Carol, who had a business degree and opinions about everything. I stayed on as what they called an advisor. I liked that word back then. Advisor, it made me feel useful. There was one more thing Walter left me. A small piece of land, maybe 4 acres, sitting along the north edge of Miller's Lake, out past where the paved road ends and the gravel begins. His grandfather had bought it decades ago for almost nothing, thinking he might build a cabin there someday. Nobody ever built anything. It sat there year after year, growing wild cattails, scrub pine, a rusted fence post or two. No road led straight to it. No one had ever offered to buy it. Walter used to drive out there sometimes just to sit and look at the water. He asked me once, near the end, to keep paying the taxes on it, not because it was worth anything, just because it had been his family's and he didn't want to let it go. I promised him I would. It was a small promise. The kind you make without thinking too hard because you love someone and they are dying and you would promise them the moon if they asked. Every year after that, I paid it, $211. I wrote the check myself in November and mailed it to the county. It became a small, quiet ritual, my way of keeping a piece of Walter alive, I suppose, long after everything else about him had gone soft and blurry in my memory. David used to tease me about it at Thanksgiving. Gently at first, "Mom still paying rent on the swamp," he'd say, and everyone would laugh and I would laugh too because it was funny in a way. Carol called it sentimental nonsense. Once she suggested I let the county take it for back taxes, save myself the trouble. I told her I wasn't going to do that. She raised her eyebrows and didn't push it, not that year. I want you to remember that land. I want you to hold on to it the way I did without knowing why it mattered. Because everything I am about to tell you, the hurt, the shame, the long nights I spent wondering if I had become a burden to my own family, all of it circles back, eventually, to 4 acres of weeds by a lake nobody visited. The trouble started small, the way trouble often does. It never announces itself. It just changes the temperature in a room, a little at a time, until one day you look around and realize you are cold and you don't know when it happened. It began with meetings I wasn't invited to. Small ones at first, a supplier negotiation, a discussion about expanding the store's hours, things I used to sit in on out of habit more than necessity. Then David started saying things like, "We didn't want to bother you with it, Mom," and I told myself that was kindness. I told myself that for longer than I should have. Then came the day Carol sat me down in my own kitchen, mind you, the one Walter and I had eaten breakfast in for 40 years, and told me gently that it might be time to think about simplifying things. She used that word a lot, simplifying. She said the store's finances were getting complicated, that there were tax advantages to restructuring the ownership, that it would be easier for everyone, she said, for everyone, if I signed some papers giving David full control. I want to be honest with you, I did not read those papers as carefully as I should have. I trusted my son. That is not a foolish thing, to trust your own child. It is only foolish not to notice when trust is being used against you. I signed. David hugged me afterward and said, "Thanks, Mom, this is going to make things so much simpler." He was right, it did make things simpler for him. Within 4 months, I no longer had a say in the store. Within 6, David suggested kindly, always so kindly, that the apartment above the store where I had been staying since selling the house was needed for storage. He found me a small place across town, a 1-bedroom with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. He said it would be cozier. He said it like it was a gift. I moved my life into 2 rooms, a recliner, a bed, Walter's old reading lamp, a box of photographs I hadn't looked through in years. I told myself I was still part of the family. I told myself that for a while too. The real blow came at Christmas. I want to tell you about that Christmas slowly, because it is the part of this story that still sits heaviest in my chest, even now, even with everything that came after. I arrived at David and Carol's house at 4 in the afternoon, the way I always had. I brought a pie, apple, Walter's favorite, though he wasn't there to eat it, of course, but I made it anyway out of habit or maybe out of hope. The house was full. My grandchildren were there, Carol's parents were there, old friends of the family, people I had known for 20 years. Nobody had told me the time had changed. I stood on that porch in the cold for almost 10 minutes before anyone answered the door. When Carol finally opened it, she looked surprised to see me, not happy surprised, the other kind. She said, "Oh, Eleanor, we thought you weren't coming this year." Behind her, I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, my grandson's voice. I asked her what she meant. She said, carefully, the way you speak to someone you think might make a scene, that they'd decided to keep things smaller this year, immediate family only. She said it like that phrase didn't include me anymore. I stood there holding a pie I had made with my own 2 hands, and I understood all at once that I was not immediate family. Not anymore. I had become someone they managed, someone they simplified. I did not cry on that porch. I want you to know that. I have my pride even now. I said something polite, I don't even remember what, and I walked back to my car, and I set the pie on the passenger seat, and I drove home in the dark with my hands very steady on the wheel and my heart doing something else entirely. That night, alone in my little apartment, I finally let myself feel it. Not anger, not yet, just a terrible, quiet grief, the kind that doesn't come from one wound but from 100 small ones you didn't let yourself notice at the time. I sat in Walter's old recliner with the lamp turned low, and I thought about all the years I had given that family, the books I had kept, the customers I had remembered by name, the Christmases I had hosted, and I thought, this is what it comes to. A door I have to knock on, a pie nobody wanted. I did not sleep much that winter. In January, David called to say the store's accountant had recommended one more small adjustment. He needed my signature to remove my name from the original deed entirely, a formality, he said, since I wasn't involved in day-to-day operations anymore. He said it would help with something called liability. I didn't fully understand the word, and I was too tired, too hollowed out to ask him to explain it twice. I signed that one too. I want to pause here and tell you something in case you are listening to this and some part of it feels familiar to you. There is no shame in trusting your children. There is no shame in being tired or grieving or wanting to believe that the people who came from your own body would never let you fall. The shame, if there is any in this story, does not belong to me. I have made my peace with that. It took time, but I made my peace with it. By spring, I owned almost nothing. The store gone from my name, the house sold years before. My savings, modest to begin with, dwindling faster than I expected because it turns out that being quietly pushed out of a family business does not come with a pension. I had my small apartment, my late husband's recliner, a little money in the bank, and a lakeside lot full of weeds that nobody, including me, thought was worth anything at all. I did not know it yet, but that lot was the only thing I owned that my son had never asked me to sign away. It is strange looking back how quiet the lowest point of my life actually was. You might expect shouting, slammed doors, a dramatic scene, but betrayal in a family rarely looks like that. It looks like silence. It looks like not being invited. It looks like a phone that used to ring every Sunday and stops ringing at all. I spent that spring mostly alone. I walked to the little grocery store 2 blocks from my apartment. I sat by the window and watched cars go by. Some days I didn't speak to another human being from morning until night. I want to tell you that I was strong through all of it, but that would not be honest, and I promised myself, telling this story, that I would be honest with you. Some days I was not strong at all. Some days I sat in that recliner and wondered what the point of any of it had been, the marriage, the store, the raising of a son who now crossed the street, in a manner of speaking, to avoid me. But something in me, some stubborn, quiet thing, maybe the same thing that made me keep paying $211 a year for land nobody wanted, refused to lie down completely. In May, I got a letter from the county. It said there had been an inquiry about my property near Miller's Lake. It asked me to contact the assessor's office at my convenience. I almost threw it away. I want you to understand that. I almost didn't call. I assumed it was another notice about taxes, another small bill to add to the pile, but something made me pick up the phone. The woman at the assessor's office was kind, brisk, the way government workers often are when they have too many calls and not enough time. She told me a survey crew had been out near my property the month before at the request of a private company. She didn't have details. She suggested I might want to speak to someone. She gave me a name, a land use attorney downtown, a young man named Thomas Reyes. I called him more out of curiosity than hope. I remember sitting in his small office a week later, an office with mismatched chairs and a window that didn't quite close, and telling him the whole history of that land, Walter's grandfather, the promise I'd made, the $211 a year. He listened the way young people rarely listen anymore, without checking his phone once. He told me he would look into it and that I shouldn't get my hopes up. He said land like mine, unpaved, no direct road access, zoned for almost nothing, rarely turned out to be valuable. He said it gently, the way you'd warn a child not to expect too much from a lottery ticket. I told him I understood. I truly did not expect much. I had learned by then not to expect much of anything. 3 weeks passed, I heard nothing. I told myself that was the answer, no news, because there was nothing to find. I went back to my quiet days, my walks to the grocery store, my recliner by the window. Then in June, Thomas called and asked if he could come by. He sat across from me at my small kitchen table, the same kind of table I remember thinking that I used to sit at with Carol the day she told me it was time to simplify things. He had a folder with him, and inside it were maps, older ones, county records going back decades. He told me that a company had been quietly buying up land near Miller's Lake for almost 2 years, not for the lake itself. For something else, a new stretch of highway the state had been planning, one that would connect the interstate to the growing side of town, cutting the drive time nearly in half. The route had been kept quiet during planning, the way those things sometimes are, to keep land prices from spiking before the state could secure what it needed. My heart, I'll admit, gave a small lift at that, but Thomas held up his hand before I could feel too much hope. He said most of the land near the lake wasn't part of the route at all. The state had already secured what it needed on the south and east sides. My 4 acres on the north edge sat outside the corridor. I remember nodding quietly the way you do when disappointment arrives right where you expected it to. I told him it was all right. I thanked him for looking into it. I even managed something close to a smile. He didn't leave, though. He kept looking at the maps, frowning slightly, the way people do when something doesn't quite sit right in their mind. He said there was one detail that puzzled him. The proposed highway needed an access road, a smaller road, built to connect the new highway to the lake community and the old county road that ran past my property. And there was only one legal, already surveyed right-of-way that could carry that access road without cutting through wetland the state was required to protect. That right-of-way ran straight through the middle of my 4 worthless acres. I did not understand at first what that meant. Thomas had to explain it to me twice slowly, the way you'd explain something to someone who has had a very long day. He said that without my land, the state's entire access plan for that side of the highway would need to be redrawn, a process that could take years and cost millions. He said that made my little lot, in his words, quietly essential. Not because of the weeds or the water or the view Walter used to sit and admire. Because of exactly where it sat on a map nobody, in my family, had ever bothered to look at. I sat very still for a long moment. I thought about Walter driving out there all those years just to look at the lake. I thought about $211 paid every November without fail. I thought about David calling it the swamp, and Carol suggesting I let the county take it. I did not feel triumph, not yet. Mostly I felt Walter's absence very sharply, and I wished more than anything that he could have been sitting at that table to hear it. Thomas told me not to say a word to anyone yet. He said these things move slowly, that offers would come, and that I should let him handle the conversations. He said gently, "Eleanor, whatever this land is worth, it's worth more if we're patient." I told him I had gotten very good this past year at being patient. It took another 2 months before the first offer came. I remember opening the envelope at my kitchen table, alone, the way I had opened so many envelopes alone that year. The number on the page made me set it down and walk to the window and stand there for a long while, just breathing. I will not tell you the exact figure. It does not matter, not really, not for this story. What matters is that it was enough to matter, enough to change the shape of the rest of my life, enough that Thomas, when I called him, laughed for the first time since I'd known him and said, "Eleanor, I don't think you understand yet what just happened to you." I did understand, though. Slowly, sitting there with that letter in my lap, I understood completely. Word travels fast in a small town, even when you try to keep it quiet. I don't know exactly how David heard. Perhaps someone at the county office mentioned it. Perhaps a neighbor saw the survey trucks and put 2 and 2 together faster than we had. But by August, my phone, which had been silent for the better part of a year, began to ring again. The first call was from Carol. She was warm, warmer than she had been in a long while. She asked how I was doing, said she'd been thinking about me, said the kids missed me. She did not mention the land, not that first call. The second call, 2 days later, mentioned it plainly. She said she'd heard something about the property by the lake, and wasn't it wonderful, wasn't it just wonderful, and wouldn't it be nice if the whole family could sit down together and talk about the future. She used the word family 4 times in that phone call. I counted. David called after that. His voice was different than I'd heard it in a long time, careful, almost shy, the way he used to sound as a boy when he'd broken something and wasn't sure how much trouble he was in. He said he'd made mistakes. He said the business had been harder than he expected, that he and Carol had been under a lot of pressure, that he was sorry things had gotten complicated between us. He did not, I noticed, apologize for Christmas. He did not mention the porch, or the pie, or the 10 minutes I'd stood in the cold. I let him talk. I have found, at my age, that letting people talk tells you more about them than anything you could ask directly. He got to it eventually. He said the store had fallen behind a loan, a bad quarter, a supplier dispute that had turned into a lawsuit. He said, and his voice caught a little here, that he didn't know where else to turn. He asked if we could talk. He asked if I would consider helping. I want to tell you what that moment felt like, because I think it is the truest part of this whole story. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the urge to make him suffer the way I had suffered, to stand him out on a cold porch and make him wait 10 minutes before I opened the door. I felt mostly tired, the old, familiar tiredness of a mother who has loved her child through every version of himself, even the ones that hurt her. But I had also learned something that year, something I do not think I could have learned any other way. I had learned that being kind and being foolish are not the same thing. I had learned that you can love someone with your whole heart and still refuse to hand them the keys to your life a second time. I told David I would think about it. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I told him I needed time, the same courtesy he and Carol had never once extended to me. I spent that week doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat with myself. I walked out one afternoon to the lake, the actual lake, the one I had never once visited in all the years I'd paid taxes on that land. Thomas drove me out since I didn't trust my old car on the gravel road anymore. We stood at the edge of the water, and I understood finally why Walter used to come here. It was quiet, it was still, it did not ask anything of you. I thought about the store, I thought about the family. I thought most of all about the 2 versions of myself, the one who had signed papers without reading them because she trusted too easily, and the one standing at the edge of that lake now, with a lawyer beside her and an offer in her pocketbook that had changed everything. I decided something standing there. I decided I would help my son. Not because he deserved it without question. I want to be honest. I don't know that he did, not yet, but because I am still his mother, and some doors you do not close all the way, even when you have every right to. But I decided I would help him on my terms, not his, not Carol's. When David and Carol came to my apartment the following week, the same small apartment they had once called cozy, sitting in the same chairs Walter had once relaxed in, I laid it out plainly. I told them I would put money into the store enough to settle the debt and give it a real chance to recover, but my name would go back on the deed, not as an advisor this time. As an owner, with a voice, with a vote, with a say in every decision that mattered. I told them I expected to be at the table for every meeting from now on, not informed about it afterward, over the phone if I was lucky. I told them Christmas would happen at my apartment this year, all of it, the whole family, and no one would forget to tell me the time. Carol started to say something about how complicated the paperwork might be, and I looked at her. I did not raise my voice. I want you to know that. I never raised my voice, and I said, Carol, I have learned quite a lot about paperwork this past year. She did not finish her sentence. David cried a little at the end of that conversation. I don't know if it was relief or shame or something more complicated than either. I did not comfort him the way I once might have. I let him sit with it. I think, in a strange way, that was the kindest thing I could have done for him. We signed the new agreement 2 weeks later in Thomas's office, with the window that still didn't quite close. I read every word this time, every single one. I want to tell you what happened after, because I think it matters as much as the twist itself. The store did recover slowly, the way most things worth having recover. David changed some, not completely. People rarely change completely, and I have stopped expecting them to. But he calls me now every Sunday the way he used to when he was young and the world was smaller and simpler for both of us. He asks my opinion before he makes decisions, not after. Carol and I are not close, not the way some mothers and daughters-in-law are, but she is polite now and careful, and I think some part of her is a little afraid of me, which I will admit does not entirely displease me. I did not sell all of the land. Thomas advised me to keep a small piece of it close to the water, and I did. I had a little cabin built there, small, simple, nothing fancy, the kind of cabin Walter's grandfather always meant to build and never got around to. I go out there most weekends now. I sit where Walter used to sit, and I look at the water, and I think about how strange it is that the thing everyone laughed at, the thing I was mocked for holding on to, turned out to be the only thing that held on to me. I think about that porch sometimes still. The cold, the 10 minutes, the pie nobody wanted. I do not think the sting of it will ever fully leave me, and I have stopped expecting it to. Some wounds do not need to disappear to be healed over, they just need to stop bleeding. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything at all, is not a lesson about land or money or lawsuits or clever twists of fate. It is something simpler than that. It is this: the things people call worthless, the small quiet promises you keep long after anyone else remembers why, the parts of your life that get laughed at around a dinner table. Those things are yours. They belong to you and to no one else's opinion of them. Keep them. Pay the $211, whatever your version of it is. You may never need it to save you, but if you ever do, you will be very glad you didn't let it go. I am not angry anymore. I want you to hear that clearly because I think it is the most important thing I have told you tonight. I am not angry at my son or at Carol or even at the year I spent alone in that small apartment with Walter's old lamp for company. I have made a kind of peace with all of it, the way you make peace with whether you cannot change. You simply learn to dress for it and you keep walking. But I still wonder, some evenings, sitting by that lake with the light going gold over the water, what would have happened if that survey crew had never come? If the highway had been routed some other way? If I had simply been an old woman with 4 useless acres and a family that had already decided I didn't matter? I wonder too about all the people listening to this who are sitting, right now, in their own version of my small apartment, dismissed, sidelined, quietly written out of their own family's plans. I wonder how many of you are holding on to some small, unremarkable thing that everyone around you has laughed about for years. So let me ask you this, and I would truly like to know, not the land, not the money, but the thing itself. What is it that you are still holding on to, quietly, faithfully, even though everyone around you has told you it isn't worth the trouble? And what would it take, do you think, for you to finally believe them wrong?